Increasing amount of literature has linked media violence to physical and relational aggression. Previous study on this topic has mostly been conducted on early childhood or primary age children. In fact, a 2012 meta-analysis indicated only 9 relevant studies in the adolescent age bracket. Hence, the authors are extending this longitudinal study previously led by Moeller and Colley in 2012 to further examine the efficacy of school-based and intervention program on reducing media violence and aggression over a 3-year period. The study aims to evaluate the sustained efficacy of media violence intervention program on reducing adolescents' violent media use, normative acceptance, and aggression. The 3 hypotheses proposed in this study is that participants in the intervention group will 1. Show lower level of violent media use, and 2. Reduction of media violence than participants in the control group at the post-intervention measurement T2, which will be sustained at the 2 subsequent follow-up at T3 and T4. The third hypothesis predict lower level of normative acceptance of aggression at the T3 follow-up, which will be linked to the lower levels of aggression in both at T3 and prospectively at T4. 80% of the participants are German, with the remaining 20% of migration background. I believe this large sample size will give strength to its credibility. Sample from the original study, 56 of these students were excluded from the present sample given that they have dispersed across different classes in T3 and T4. In line with German regulations, parental consent was sought for participants under the age of 14. Although the authors did not mention, I will critique this particular weakness in sample filtration. As the intervention program comes with the expectation of parental involvement, parents who are less involved in child's education will be less inclined to give consent. Parents can also refuse consent if they're aware of excessive violent media use or aggression at home, and understandably would not want this exposed at school. Berlin has a 3-tier secondary school system which cater for students of different academic ability and social orientation after primary years. The authors sourced 38 classes from 10 different schools across 3 types of school to represent students of various ability and socio-economic ranking in society. This strengthened the sample diversity. The intervention consisted of 5 weekly sessions and 2 parents' evening at the beginning and the end of the program. The first meeting informed parents about potentially harmful effect of exposure to violent media, provided guidelines for support for sensible media diet and exposure times, and enlisted their support for media-free weekends. Researchers did not register attendance and are therefore unable to report the percentage of parents who took part. I feel the lack of attendance record is a weakness in accountability. However, all students took supplementary materials home. The students' curriculum addressed 2 main areas, which were 90 minutes each session. The restricted consuming module consisted of 1 week diary of daily media use. Recording everyday media diet raised the awareness of problematic violence exposure. On weekends, participants were asked to abstain from all use of media. Alternative leisure activities and strategies were taught in class to help students cut down their use of screen time. Here you have a sample of the homework tasks set to reduce violence consumption and promote reflection on media use. In the critical consuming module, they seek to increase participants' awareness of different forms of violence by presenting clips that showed atypical and less obvious forms of violence. Students learn to recognize characteristic ways in which violence are portrayed in the media. Short-term mechanisms, such as priming of aggressive thoughts and feelings, were illustrated in demonstration, and long-term mechanisms, such as desensitization and learning process, were linked to personal experiences. On the right is a sample of such intervention material. Participants also actively rehearsed and performed a scene that dealt with conflict with peers and parents. This group performance was then filmed and presented to parents at the second parents' evening. They first look at the baseline measurement of exposure to media violence, normative beliefs about aggression, and self-reported aggressive behavior at T1. Participants were assigned to the intervention or control group on a class basis. For each intervention class, a comparison class was randomly selected from the same school and the same year cohort. Once control group completed the measurements, they did not receive any forms of treatment. The intervention began 3 months after the baseline assessment. T2 was 7 months after. T3 was another 12 months later, and T4 was 24 months later, so post-intervention period spanned a total of 30 months. At each wave, researchers measured the use of violent and non-violent media by frequency, which participants reported use of various genres. Normative acceptance of aggression was measured by asking participants to imagine a vignette of proactive scenario and ask how acceptable various responses were. The aggressive behavior was measured by a 10-item self-report instrument, half addressed to physical and half addressed to relational aggression. A major weakness here is the reliance of self-report on all three parameters, which can be susceptible to social desirability. This graph shows the immediate violence used at T2, T3, and T4, and self-reported physical aggression at T3 was significantly lower in the intervention group. And in the indirect path from the intervention to T3 aggression via T2 media violence use was significant. Lower T2 media violence use predicted lower T3 normative acceptance of aggression amongst participants with lower initial aggression. Strong correlation across all parameters strengthens the findings. In conclusion, the study affirms the sustained effect of an intervention designed to decrease media violence use, which reduces the normative acceptance of aggression and physically aggressive behavior. The observed difference between intervention and control group provides further evidence to support that media violence is a risk factor for aggressive behavior. In the non-treated control group, post-intervention levels of media violence use were higher, and higher media violence use predicted higher aggression another year later. These patterns are in line with the other longitudinal studies on adolescents. Implication ranges from future research directions, education curriculums, to policy and guidelines regarding media broadcasting. It strengthens the link between media violence to adolescent aggression and show policymakers, educators, and parents the necessity to condemn the media normalizing beliefs. Lastly, the duration of this study proves great strength in the longevity effect of media violence on desensitization and social learning.